So as mentioned, my name is Nicoletta and I work at UPR Info, which is a Geneva-based NGO who works to protect human rights. And we do so by using the Universal Periodic Review. So what we do is try to facilitate the engagement of different actors in using this human rights instrument, this human rights mechanism at its best. So I think you might see the slides, or maybe no.
Yeah, not yet. Do you want to try sharing them again?
Yes, let me try again.
Mine disappeared before and I had to reshare them. I don't know why.
Okay, let's see if this time technology helps.
There we go.
Okay, so you can see them now. So here, a little picture of our organization. This is our website. We provide all the information regarding the Universal Periodic Review. You just need to type on Google UPR info and you can find on this website really everything, every news, updates, information or activity that we organize related to the Universal Periodic Review. So what is this Universal Periodic Review? Just to be sure that everyone is on the same page, this mechanism was created in 2006 and started to run its meetings called more technically working group sessions in 2008. It's a peer review where states review other states on the human rights situation in their country. So up to now, we are currently ending the fourth cycle of the UPR. That means that 98% of the UN member states, or a bit less, have been reviewed 4 times. And very, very soon, we will start the fifth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. And the UK is one of the first countries that will be reviewed in the fifth cycle. Now, to date, I cannot give you the exact time of when the United Kingdom will be reviewed because the calendar of the fifth cycle has not been published yet. But we assume that the next review of the UK will take place in November 2027. So let's say that this is a good moment to start and reflect on how to organize the work in order to engage in next UK's UPR. So on the screen, you can see a timeline. And this is a timeline that we have on our website, and it can help you to keep in mind that the UPR is a process, and that in this process, there are different entry points, different steps that you can take in order to have a role, have a say in this peer review mechanism. Because even if it's a state review, there are entry points for civil society organizations to play an important role. Just to give you a snapshot, very quick, on what happened 4 years and a half ago during the fourth cycle of the UPR, the UK was reviewed in November 2022. And the UK government received 302 recommendations by the other states. These recommendations are suggestions that states make to the state under review, and they basically suggest measures that are necessary to take in order to improve a certain human right or to bring the state, to bring accountability to human rights violations that occurred and were reported in the state under review. So the United Kingdom, as all the other countries, has the opportunity to choose which recommendations from the other states to support and which recommendations to not. When the UK, as well as the other governments and the other
Nicoletta,
states, yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Are your slides supposed to be moving? Or are
I'm
you still on the first slide?
I'm actually moving, but maybe you don't see that.
Okay.
I'm on the fourth slide. Doesn't work. Let's see. And now, does it work?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Great, thank
Let's
you.
try like that. Thank you so much. Sorry for this inconvenience. We will make it. No worries. So this was a snapshot that I was describing on the number of recommendations that the UK has received. So as I told you, there are 302 recommendations received in 2022. And I was saying that the UK, as all the other states, has the possibility to support these recommendations or to note them. When the state decides to support a recommendation, it engages itself before the international community, but especially before the citizens of its own country, to respect those commitments, those measures that are described in the recommendations. Something very, let's say, a very good practice that the UK has put in place is that in August 2025, the UK government submitted a midterm report. That's a good practice because every UPR cycle lasts 4 years and a half, approximately 4 years and a half. And by submitting a midterm report, the UK showed its will to provide an assessment on the level of implementation of the UPR recommendations received in 2022. And the thematics that were addressed during this mid-report address domestic human rights framework, migration and asylum policy issues, sexual orientation and gender, and as well as human rights trafficking. Just to give you an idea, the UK is one of the 88 states that has submitted a midterm report. So it's a very good practice because not all the states do so. And it's a way to show accountability and to show that they take seriously this human rights mechanism. Now, just to give you an idea of the thematics that were received, that were addressed during UK's UPR, you can see this, some of you can see this little visual that shows a bit a percentage of the topics that were addressed during the UPR. So we have a majority of recommendations that address the legal and general framework. So, for example, in the amendments of national legislation to make it more conform with international standards. We also have a big portion of recommendations that address cross-cutting issues, for example, non-discrimination related issues. We have a bit smaller, but still very important number of recommendations regarding civil and political rights, specifically, for example, on the elimination of torture, for example, in detention centers, or participation in political processes without any type of discrimination. And then we see that there is let's say a more, there are less recommendations concerning economic, social, and cultural rights. However, there is still a significant number of those recommendations, as well as recommendations that address specifically women's rights and children's rights. Excuse me. What I would like to highlight is through this example of the UK is that the Universal Periodic Review, given its nature, it has the possibility to discuss, to tackle a variety of human rights issues, differently from other human rights mechanisms, as for example, those that are stemming from international treaties or conventions. What do I mean? For example, the countries that have ratified the convention, the treaty for the Convention for the Rights of Children, they undergo the scrutiny, the review of the Committee of the Rights of Children, that is made up of international experts that verify if the states that have ratified that specific convention are actually complying with the obligations enshrined in that convention. The Universal Periodic Review works can address also topics that are not strictly enshrined in specific conventions, or even if the state has not ratified that convention, there can be UPR recommendations asking the state to ratify additional treaties and additional conventions. So the UPR mechanism reinforces the other human rights mechanism as the treaty bodies, as well as the special procedures. Again, the difference is that special procedures as well can be thematically or country focused, whereas the UPR can address any human rights issue, even the ones that are emerging. Even, for example, if we take the environmental, the recognition to the right of a clean and healthy environment, this issue was brought up in the UPR back in 2012 onwards, whereas we had to wait in 2022 for the Human Rights Council to recognize a right to a clean and healthy environment. Now, to give you very concretely an idea of what are these recommendations, I just selected a few. Like this, you can have really a clear idea what I mean when I talk about recommendations. So how does these recommendations look like? I will read a couple of them that the UK has received and supported in the previous cycle. For example, strengthen the implementation of programs and policies to provide effective access to healthcare for women belonging to marginalized groups. This is a recommendation that was received by UK by Azerbaijan. Another example is develop a comprehensive digital inclusion strategy for children and young people to promote their online safety and sustainable inclusion. A recommendation received by UK and supported by UK, and this recommendation was done by Bulgaria. And another one, just to give you another taste of the type of issues addressed, reads, ensure that all cases of violence, especially sexual assault against children in detention, are promptly, impartially, and effectively investigated, and that the judges, prosecutors, and members of the police receive specialized training in preventing the abuse of children in detention. This recommendation was supported by UK and was done by Liechtenstein. I actually found also a recommendation that was mentioning Scotland specifically, that reads as follows. Take a concrete step to reduce rates of racially motivated hate crimes and discrimination faced by Afro-descendants and other ethnic minorities, including in Scotland and Northern Ireland, while ensuring that perpetrators do not enjoy impunity. So usually these recommendations can vary, as you can see from the ones that I read, and they can be more or less specific. But where do these recommendations come from? And this is what we will see now, very briefly, because we don't have a lot of time together. So one key message I'd like to share is that the UPR is a process, something that I said also at the beginning. Why do we say it's a process? Because there are different phases, 3 phases we can identify. A phase it's a preparation to the review. The review itself, that happens once every 4 years and a half. And then there is the third phase, the most important one that you cannot see on the screen because Microsoft today is not, Teams is not helping us today. But the third phase is the implementation phase. Basically, when the government is responsible of implementing the recommendations received. And civil society is responsible of monitoring how the state is implementing those recommendations. And I will add also something else. Civil society, as well as national human rights institutions, equity bodies, anyone in society does not only have the possibility and the opportunity to monitor what the engagements of the states, but through your work, you also have the possibility to support the implementation of those recommendations. Now, let's answer to the question I asked before. Where do the recommendations that the UK, as well as the other countries, come from? These recommendations, as I said before, they are formulated by the states, by other diplomats. But the diplomats, in order to make relevant and relevant recommendations on the human rights situation of every country, they base their work on 3 reports that are prepared in advance of each UPR session. The first report is the national report. It's a self-assessment that the country does of how it has been implementing the human rights engagement in the previous cycle of the UPR. The second report is a compilation of UN information. Basically a summary of reports submitted by UN agencies, if these are working in the country. For example, if there is an Office of UN Women or UNICEF, these agencies can provide a report in advance to the UPR of the UK, and then they are all compiled in the compilation of UN information. And the third report, extremely important, the focus of our work, of our online session today, a summary of stakeholders' reports. Who are the other stakeholders? The other stakeholders are civil society organizations, any type of NGO association working to protect and promote human rights. You, as member of civil society organization, can submit a report on the thematics and issues in which you are experts. And these reports will be then compiled in a summary of 10 pages that will be made public on the website of OHCHR, of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. And this report, this summary, together with the other 2, represents the basis of the review of each state. So why is it extremely important for you as members of civil society organizations to engage in the UPR? First of all, it's important that you provide an alternative perspective to the national report. It's important to have the perspective of civil society, of how the human rights situation is in a country. Secondly, it's important that you share, you highlight what are issues that might be overlooked by the report of the state. And it's important that you provide those highlights in your analysis to really inform the international community of what are the priorities in your country. But the UPR also provides you with the opportunity to suggest solutions for those issues, and you can provide those. You can provide recommendations in your reports and in your advocacy work, so that the others use them and formulate them during the UPR working group session. So one of the first entry points that you have to engage in the Universal Periodic Review is the submission of reports. Now, to submit these reports, there are very precise guidelines. And there is a very strict deadline. Now, as I said at the beginning, unfortunately, I'm not able to provide you with the exact date of the next deadline that you would have to provide these inputs and to provide your analysis, because the calendar has not been published yet. However, I can already anticipate to, let's say, start planning, retro planning, and have as a approximate deadline March, April 2027. Okay, be aware that the deadline when it's published is very strict, so it's very important that you plan ahead. The guidelines for those who are or have already engaged in the UPR, I just let's say a little tip, they might slightly change. There might be some adjustments that the Office of the High Commissioner will make to make these reports even more precise and to be able to assess even better the implementation of the previous recommendations. But overall, they will be very similar of the guidelines in the fourth cycle of the UPR. For those instead who have never engaged in the UPR, here I will just give like a few, let's say, key messages and good practices that can be used by everyone. And then I will go a bit more in details on what is the content, what are the things that you can include in your report. So let's start with the good practices that you can use throughout the whole UPR process, because let's remember that it's a process. It's not just one phase in preparation of the review, but it's important to keep the attention on the commitments that the state takes in order to make the state accountable of those commitments. So what are these good practices? It's very important to use the UPR to organize consultations with vulnerable groups and collect information from them. Like this, you will be able to provide first-hand information in your reporting, as well as using that first-hand information for your monitoring efforts throughout the UPR process. What does it mean? It means that if you work, for example, on non-discrimination and with children, it could be interesting to have consultations with children or with youth groups to hear from them what are their concerns, and you can report on those concerns and formulate it in a let's say in an analytical way in your report. It's also important when you engage in the UPR reporting to use different sources of data so that your information can be supported and your analysis can be supported by that data. However, it's important that data sources are, of course, credible and objective. And the last, let's say, good practice, advice, and I think even the most important one is that the UPR process and the reporting especially brings actors to work together. And that is really something impactful and meaningful, because the coordination that you can have by working with other NGOs, with other association, will be very precious, not only when you submit a report, so that you are sure that all the human rights topics that are a priority in your region are covered, but also because those bonds that you create in this preparation phase of the review can be very important in the follow-up, in organizing advocacy efforts to follow up on the commitments that the UK has taken in human rights issues. But let's see a bit in details what are the things to include in your report. So first thing to keep in mind, these reports should be focused and analytical. So really submit a report on the topics in which you are an expert and provide an analysis of that specific human rights issue or issues on which you have expertise. Secondly, it's extremely important to make reference to previous recommendations. So go and look to previous UPR recommendations tackling the topic on which you are working. And make an explicit reference by mentioning the title, the number or the state that made that recommendation. Why? Because it's important to have your feedback on how your state has implemented or not implemented that recommendation received in the past. So really do not hesitate, and this is the third point, to make these explicit comments on the level of implementation of previous recommendations. You can, for example, say, just an example. The UK has received in 2022 15 recommendations on the rights of the child, and 3 of these recommendations made by Spain about inclusion in the schools were partially implemented by UK, and then you explain why you provide that type of evaluation, the partially implemented evaluation of those recommendations with your analysis and with facts. And this brings me to the fourth point, what to do while submitting a report. Really prioritize first-hand information, data, views, and conclusions that you can collect. Rather than, for example, I did not change the slide, I'm sorry. Rather than mentioning or copy pasting extracts of reports that have been published by other international organizations. Really, it's important that you provide the information that you collect on the ground through your daily work. And fifth and lastly, seize the opportunity of submitting a report. Seize the opportunity to formulate recommendations that describe measures that you think are necessary and relevant to improve a certain human rights issue. Now, we always advise to use the SMART methodology, basically 5 adjectives that can help you to formulate the recommendations so that they are action-oriented and precise. The acronym stands for S for specific, so really try to identify one specific action. M for measurable, so something that can be measured over time so that you know after 4 years and a half if your state has implemented or not that recommendation. These recommendations should be achievable, so something that can be achieved that does not take into consideration only the will of the state, but really that can be substantially achieved in the 4 years and a half period from one cycle to another. These recommendations should be are relevant, so relevant to the context, but this is not a problem because you are experts of human rights in your country. And T, if that can be helpful, time-bound. Sometimes it could be interesting to add a time reference that is more specific to your recommendations. So these are just a few, let's say, tips when you prepare the report. Include the recommendations and make them smart.
Just while you're moving on to the next slide, Nicoletta, can we maybe have like a 5-10 minute warning so we've got time for questions?
Yes, totally. Yes, if you have questions, go ahead. And you can raise your hand and also type the question in the chat. If you have already typed it, I will look at it as soon as I finish. So I'm almost done actually. Just to keep in mind that when you decide to submit a report, keep in mind that you will have the possibility to submit a report on behalf of your own organization or decide to submit a report jointly with other NGOs. This choice is quite important because it has an impact on the word limits that you have available in your report. So if you decide to submit a report only on behalf of your organization, you have approximately 2,815 words. This is about 5 pages. If you decide to submit a report jointly, you will have 5,630 words. That's about 10 pages. Either options are welcomed. We, as organization, encourage joint submission because we believe that working in a coalition can be very positive and have a positive impact also for the follow-up. But this choice is up to you. Very important rule to keep in mind is that you can make just one individual submission, so just one report on behalf of one organization. And you can be the lead of only one joint submission. So you cannot be the lead of many different reports with many different organizations. Even if you can participate by providing inputs to other NGOs. So that gives you, anyway, some space to provide information. Now, I'd like to complete just to give you some practical information of where to find all the information related to the UPR. So you can use UPR Info's database, which is a database of recommendations that is quite friendly, user-friendly, and you can easily find all the recommendations that the UK has received in the past UPR cycles. Also very important, as I said that at the beginning, that the UPR can support and strengthen the other human rights protection mechanism as the special procedures and the treaty bodies, it could be also interesting to check another database, the Universal Human Rights Index. This is a database that has been set up by the Office of the High Commission of Human Rights, and it includes all the recommendations from all the different treaty bodies. So that can be also something useful to know whether the issue or concern that you're working on has been maybe addressed in another human rights mechanism, and you can reinforce through the UPR those human rights commitments. If you want to learn about what topics were addressed and how the UPR of last time was organized and who participated and who took the floor, you can find all the documents linked to the UPR of the UK on the website of the OSCHR. And I have the link on the slide, and you can be like, we will share the slides with you, so you will have all the links. And just to conclude, once that you have submitted a report, that's only the first step. Basically, there is also important that the information that you include in your report is shared widely through advocacy work that you can conduct, both in the UK and in Geneva. And your target for this advocacy work before the UPR are the diplomats of the other states, because you want them to bring up the issues that you have raised in your reports. To do that, UPR Info, our NGO, organizes the pre-sessions, an advocacy platform open for civil society organizations to come to Geneva and speak directly with the representatives, the diplomats of the other states, and inform them of the human rights priorities before the UPR of your country. This event is published with an open call. So we publish the call on our website. You are welcomed to send your application. We will do a selection because unfortunately we cannot bring a lot of people, but we have limited numbers. Up to 5 members of civil society organizations can come to Geneva. So you can apply through the online application form. And this pre-session takes place usually 2 months before the UPR working group. So in your case, if the UPR of the UK is confirmed in November 2027, the pre-session will take place at the end of August 2027. And with that, I will conclude to leave space to questions, because maybe it's more interesting to answer directly to your doubts, or if you have any requests of clarification of the process, but also of the submission of the stakeholders' reports.
Thank you very much, Nicoletta. I am going to give you a moment to catch your breath after that incredibly comprehensive presentation. I have a few questions, but just to let people know kind of where we are at the Scottish Human Rights Commission. So as Scotland's National Human Rights Institution, we will be putting in a stakeholder report where this is the first stage of our UPR work. We're working to the same understanding that the deadline is likely to be the 1st of March, but that the UN tends to announce its final deadlines for things quite late on. So we're working to the 1st of March, but if that moves, we will, of course, make that information available. So maybe Megan or Lauren, one of you could perhaps pop the link to our UPR page on our website into the chat. And we're going to keep that updated with the video from today's session and any other information that comes out about the UPR, including the timelines. But if you are struggling to find any information, you're always very welcome to reach out to us at hello@scottishhumanrights.com, and we'll put that email in the chat in case you don't have it. So we'll also be speaking to people over the next 6 months as part of our own consultation, but I don't think I have anything to announce right now because, as I say, this is stage 1 in the process, is getting us all thinking about the UPR, the deadlines, and all of the very many requirements and rules of procedure that we have to navigate. So there are a couple of questions in the chat, and I have a couple in advance. One was about the deadline, which I think we've just answered. So we think it'll be the 1st of March, but if that moves, it'll move backwards. So probably a sort of 6-month delay. And we'll keep you posted. And another question about will versions of the reports be translated into BSL? So that's not a formal requirement of the United Nations. It is something that, as the Scottish Human Rights Commission, we do try to translate some of our reports into BSL in line with our own BSL strategy. But we're not at the stage yet of having a written report. So I don't think that there's been a formal decision made on that. But if there are UN documents that you would find useful, including the UPR documents, I and you would find those useful to be translated into BSL, that's definitely a suggestion we can take away as the Commission and think about what is doable and what we have the resource perhaps to produce, but the UN does not produce those as standard. So Nicoletta, a couple of questions that I have just in advance of today's session was about making the most of your report. So you spend all this time, you go away, you do your report, you whittle it down to that 2,800 words, and you send it into the UN. What is the best way of making sure that the UN includes your recommendations in that stakeholder summary?
Yes, so that's the advocacy work that I was mentioning at the end of the presentation. That's extremely important because you really want that those concerns brought up during the UPR working group. And they can be only brought up by other states because civil society, national human rights institutions cannot take the floor during the UPR working groups. So the targets of your advocacy work in this first phase, preparation phase of the UPR, really are the diplomats. And these diplomats, you can inform them both in the UK, so the embassies, residence foreign embassies in London, but also the permanent missions in the UK, the permanent mission, sorry, in Geneva. These are your targets of your advocacy. Then we suggest to make this advocacy strategic. What do we mean? As it can take quite a lot of time to write emails or ask for meetings to all the permanent missions in Geneva or all the resident foreign embassies in the UK, we always encourage to look at the previous UPR recommendations of the UK and see which countries made which recommendations on which topics. So, for example, if the UK always, with the example of the children's rights recommendations, received 15 recommendations, you can use UPR Info's database to see who made those recommendations. Probably it would be Italy, because Italy makes a lot of recommendations on children, or for example, the Holy See or Slovenia as well. You need to check. And so if you are an NGO working on children's rights, we suggest that your priorities is to contact those diplomats from those permanent missions, or if they have an embassy in the UK, to contact them and provide them. Beyond the report, which is definitely very important, we also advise to prepare a short and concise fact sheets where you can condense in 1 or 2 pages the concern, brief information on the data that you have collected, and recommendations. Why? Because diplomats receive a lot of information. Many of the diplomats in Geneva, for example, they would attend all the UPR working group sessions. So they will attend the reviews of 14 countries per session. It means that, if you remember, we said that every country has 3 reports that consist in the main source of information. You multiply 3 for 14. There's a lot of reports to read. That's why we suggest civil society to really be let's also creative, and by preparing fact sheets, and why not also like online events or sessions or briefings where you group diplomats from different embassies, and that could be also something interesting to do. Like this, you bring them all together and you provide all the information at once.
Thank you so much, Nicoletta. I think that was really helpful, and I think it cuts to the main point, which is, yes, your written report has to be really short, but there are lots of creative ways to make the most of it. And that leads on to a really good question in the chat. But just before I put the question on devolution to Nicoletta, just my reflection, I've worked on the international side of things at the SHRC now for 4 or 5 years, and I was involved in the previous I was involved in the previous UPR, and one of the things that I would reflect on is that the UPR process is one that the UK government and the Scottish government take really seriously. You know, these are recommendations they get from other countries, and so they're very inclined to try and show that they are a keen participant in the UPR process, and that they speak a lot about the importance of the UPR. So these recommendations actually go directly to ministers in a way that recommendations to other UN cycles perhaps don't quite reach. So that's one of the really important aspects of cutting through. But the question that Gina has put in the chat is around whether there'll be a separate UPR process for Scotland, or whether it's restricted to devolved human rights issues. So the answer is it's a UK review, but Nicoletta, perhaps, do you have any reflections on how sub-state regions or sub-state nations within one country can get their voices heard on the international stage?
Yes, that's a really good question, because we are looking into this, let's say, aspects on how to have a larger participation, especially for countries with regions. So a few things to say. The report that is the national report, so one of those three reports that I mentioned at the beginning, the national report is done by the state as a whole. However, there can be some good practices in which like inputs are provided by the regions, and these can be integrated in the national report, but it would not be a separate one. So regions can provide inputs by sharing information with the focal points in the ministries, and it depends on the system. In some countries, it's the central government that requests information to the regions. And sometimes this approach is not triggered by the central government, but is triggered by the sub-regions that ask the government to include their inputs in those reports. So that is up a bit to the every context. Then what I think it's more interesting, at least from my perspective, is the role that regions can play in the implementation of UPR recommendations, because like Scotland and the government of Scotland, they will have, let's say, they would be in the first line with the citizens of Scotland and the human rights concerns that the citizens of Scotland live. And so they would be the first level, government level, that the citizens find. So we believe that it's extremely important that the regions are aware of the commitments that the national government makes at the international level, so that they can be prepared as well to put in place measures to implement those recommendations. And there are some good practices that are developing. Morocco, for example, also is a country with different regions, and where the regions are very much active in the implementation. I know I'm not objective because I'm Italian, but also Italy has a different from the UK, but has a system of regions, and also they're just starting now, so it's not something widespread, but there are some regions that are more sensible to human rights issues and commitments, and so they're integrating this in their local policies. So like, I believe that civil society organizations and the Scottish Human Rights Institution, like, you can have a really important role in raising awareness to the local government, to the regional government, about their role, but it's sometimes it's not a given that they are aware.
Yeah, I think that's a very good description of the circumstances. So in just perhaps to give you a bit of insight into how it works in the UK government, it's the Ministry of Justice that writes the state report for the UPR, and they do go to the Scottish government and ask them for inputs. But the report is sent by the UK. But I think that's why it's really important that we have a good representation from Scottish civil society and the Scottish National Human Rights Institution, because it's through our reports that some of the nuances will be picked up. And I think that also speaks to the importance of the advocacy programme being across the whole cycle, not just about the reports, but once we have the recommendations. About making sure that those are taken forward. And for anyone who doesn't know, that the Scottish Government published its first iteration of a human rights tracker, a digital tool. It doesn't currently have UPR recommendations in it, but perhaps that's something that the government might be open to doing in future, certainly ahead of the next round of recommendations. So unfortunately, we are at time, and we have got a couple more questions in the chat, but I think just very briefly to answer the question from James about the UPR info website and whether there were lists of questions. I think maybe just to clarify that the UPR info website and database is all the recommendations that have been given to states. So they're not framed as questions, they're framed as suggestions. So they can be a really good tool to start us from, but there's not a sort of set list of questions. Is that right, Nicoletta?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes. And if like you happen to use the database and you have any technical issue or you don't know how to navigate it, really do not hesitate to write. I will write my email in the chat and we are there to provide access to information. So no problem.
Yes. Brilliant. Thank you. And that's such a kind offer. So thank you everyone for joining us and bearing with us through some slightly unforeseen tech issues. I hope that you have managed to get all the information that you needed to start thinking about UPR and start thinking about whether a civil society report might be something your organisation wants to get involved in. We also know Scottish Government and UK Government are going to start their consultations on UPR soon. So very much keep an eye on this. This is a space there's a lot happening and a lot of movement, and over the next 6 months, lots of different ways to get involved. We'll send out the presentation from Nicoletta, if that's okay, Nicoletta.
Sure, absolutely.
And all of the links and things that we've shared in the chat, as well as our email addresses if you have any questions, because this is obviously a lot of information for an hour. You will have access to the recording, so if you want to go back and have a look, but there will be a lot more to come, so keep an eye on our website and keep in touch. So with that, thank you so much to Roy and Andy, and to Carol, who is doing our electronic note-taking off screen. We will get that transcript to you, and to Nicoletta for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.